Hello everyone, and welcome back to some more G-Senjou no Maou with me, Phantom's Y. So, last time, a whole bunch of stuff happened. I can't even summarize, so go back and watch that episode if you haven't already. Anyway, let's get right into today's episode, shall we? Black suits were lined up outside the house. Shoveling my way through the numerous greetings and sharpened stares, I finally made my way to the entrance. First things first, I ask about the funeral plans. The wake is tomorrow, and the memorial service is the day after. Gonzo's body was taken to the ceremonial hall the Soa Alliance uses when its leaders die. I took care of any necessary calls, returned anything Gonzo might have borrowed, arranged for food at the ceremonies, ordered flowers, etc. Basically, I was the lackey. When I finally built up the courage to talk to the top dogs of Soa, the anxiety nearly made me vomit. Not a single person openly lamented Gonzo's death. They all seemed more relieved than anything else. It just goes to show how many people kept their distance from, feared, Azai Gonzo. The word Maou was thrown around quite a bit as well. Word seems to have spread that Maou was my brother, Samijima Kyohei. After the funeral is done and forgotten, they'll be questioning me about it. Maou. I lost myself in work, silently moving my body. I returned to my room, and Usami seems to have made herself at home. Oh man. We're not newlyweds. Wait, what's that burning smell? Yeah, well, at least you didn't set the building on fire. I lost the will to tease her. Yeah, but I have to head back out at about 9. No. Why do I like this woman again? Did Dokita say anything? I'll talk with her tomorrow. Sure. In all reality, though, there's too much to be done to kick back. Now that Gonzo is dead, the Azai Corporation is through. Maybe I'll listen to some music. I haven't done that in a while. I skimmed through my CD rack. I want something demonic. Demonic, in the context of classical music, usually means fast pieces which require unparalleled virtuosic skill. Virtuosic? I guess that's how you conjugate that in that form? I don't know. Maybe Mozart. Some people do say that he was possessed by the devil when he wrote his music. Hey, Usami. I pull out a CD and almost reflexively call Usami over. Check this out. It was one of my favorite performers' debut album. A prodigal child violinist. She was about 13 at the time. Mishima Haruna. Oh? I stare at Usami. They seem similar somehow. For real? Mishima. That Mishima? This girl is the daughter of Mishima Kaoru. What? Wait, seriously? No, this Mishima Haruna she's one of my favorite artists. What the hell is Haruna? A stage name? Why?
私は一応殺された被害者の娘でして、この CD を発表した当初はまだ幼女だったわけですし。
Well, I wouldn't say child.
いえ、レコーディングの時は12だったんです。まだまだストライクゾーンです。
Well, whatever. I was just wondering because it's kind of weird to use a stage name in classical music. I can't believe I never realized Usami Haru was Mishima Haruna. Well,
はい。
when may we expect your next album to hit the shelves?
気持ち悪いっすね、なんか。
It really hurts to be called gross by Usami.
もう出ませんよ。レコード会社との契約もとっくに切れてますし。
I see. So when you said you'd be taking a break, you were really retiring?
ほんとガキがなめんなって感じですよね。親の七光で半ば強引に CD デビューしたようなもんなんです。
Well, your mother was amazing. She took first place in the Chitar Karvaski competition and played with orchestras in Berlin, Birmingham, Philadelphia, and everywhere in between.
ええ。ですから母がすごいんですよ。
It's not surprising they wanted you to record an album. And well, to be frank, they said you were good looking too.
あ、今のところもう一度。
Huh?
まあぶっちゃけ。
To be frank, I didn't think you'd turn out to be such a disgusting girl.
そうっすか。
Her head drooped. But Mishima Haruna-san, I meant you. You won that competition in Germany, right?
よくご存知ですね。これだから浅井さんは恐ろしい。
She sighs heavily. So you must have been pretty good, right? You even have a hardcore fan right before your eyes.
正直あなたすごいマニアですよ。今自分なんて誰も知らないっすから。
Anyway, forget lunch for now. Play the violin for me.
嫌ですよ。
Hey, I'm begging for it here.
勘弁してもらえませんかね。
Do you know how rarely I get to hear live performances?
ミズハとデートで言ってたじゃないですか。
I want to hear a solo.
いや、本当に。
Seems she's really against it. Is it out of pride and she fears she'll disappoint me? Is that why you came to our school?
ああ、はい。一応編入の時に芸能活動歴ありみたいな話は通してました。
Which slackened the attendance requirement.
ですね。奨学金借りてますけど。
Huh.
なんすか？
Nothing. I was just thinking I've finally begun to understand you. She's begun to seem more human than before. Anyway, I'm going to hit the shower.
ああ、そうっすか。自分の制服は？
Crap, I forgot about them. They're still at the cleaners.
じゃあ取りに行ってきます。少し街の様子も探ってみたいですし。
Look around.
ええ。魔王の動きが気になりまして。
So am I. I'm plenty aware that this is merely the eye of the storm. Many things have happened in one short week. My mother's death, Gonzo's death, my brother's revelation, my reunion with the young hero named Usami Haru. All I want is a little time, just a little, to adjust my feelings.
ああ、浅井さん、浅井さん。
Sorry, but can dinner wait until I get back? Being surrounded by that villainous bunch always makes me lose my appetite.
いえ、お風呂なんですがね。
Hmm? You want to go first?
いえ、そうではなくて。
What are you all antsy about?
私から言わせる気ですか？
I have no idea what you're talking about. And do you want to wash my back or something?
ビンゴです。
She snapped her fingers.
意外と尽くすんですよ、自分。
Maybe you ought to leave the compliments to other people, hmm? Oh, Sami. The bathroom. And maybe I have to cut here? I have no idea. We'll see. Fix your hair already. It's an eyesore when it's all wet.
はあ。
She scrubs me with a sponge.
どうも。
Okay, I'm just waiting for this to turn into something I can't show. Sami was acting flustered behind me. Heated breaths on your shoulder. Should we wash her too?
裸ですけど。
But she's naked. I know. Boobs on your back.
これは失礼しました。
Anyway, he'll wash her.
いえ、私は結構です。
Yeah, this is definitely not going to be something that I can show. So, anyway, I'll see you guys soon. And we're back. Alright. Saw that coming from a mile away. Usami Haru wandered alone through the bright city lights. It was quite chilly tonight. As she walked around aimlessly, she reprimanded herself for forgetting to borrow a coat from Kyosuke. Something was amiss. There were a scarce few young people hanging around the shopping district. No young men loitered outside the convenience stores. No girls gathered to chat near the clubs. The street corners typically used as meeting spots were completely stripped of waiting youths. The only people wandering the streets were middle-aged con artists. They looked bored without any prey to ensnare. Haru decided to inquire about the strange state of things. She came upon a man leaning against a telephone pole, pressing buttons on his cell phone.
今なんか街でやってるんですか?
He looked Haru up and down for a moment before losing his interest and shaking his head. Did he not like her jogging suit? Whatever it is, it must be big, he said. In the end, the man she approached didn't seem to know any more than she did. He confirmed Haru's feelings, though. There was something eerie, downright creepy about the whole situation. Central Boulevard hasn't been very peaceful over the past few months, thanks to the Yakuza power struggle. The police box in the center of the city testified to the amount of juvenile crimes this city suffered. As Haru crossed the main street, a familiar face popped out of a back alley. Hashimoto-san. Hashimoto was wearing a hoodie and jeans, and was accompanied by two boys wearing a similar garb. The hostage case still hadn't been made public. Even so, Hashimoto purportedly hadn't attended school since that night. What was he doing out at this time? Haru followed after him. 20 or 30 minutes passed as she followed him. At some point, the poison oozing from the bountiful neon lights had drained away. They were nearing the business district, and would only run into it shortly if they continued on course. All that awaited them there was a span of offices. There was nothing of interest in this area for young men. There was no sign that they realized that they were being followed. Hashimoto was talking to the other two without a care in the world. They eventually arrived at the rather grandiose Sano Corporation building. There were several luxury sedans parked in front of the entrance. Two men came out of the back seat of one such car. One seemed like an aging gentleman, the other a pale foreigner. The latter's well-built muscles barely stuffed into his dark gray suit. There was a slight bulge under his jacket, likely a handgun. The shocking point, though, was that the seemingly unrelated Hashimoto began to speak with them respectfully. Haru couldn't see their faces, and their voices were only faint. However, she could tell that they had met before. The aging man waved at Hashimoto as if he knew him well. Haru noted that he was missing a finger. Hashimoto crawled into the parked car. The aging man and the pale foreigner stopped in behind him. The last man in, the foreigner, ducked into the back seat only after eyeing the surrounding area suspiciously. A vague uneasiness coursed through Haru. What was going on here? Unable to chase after an automobile, she turned back the way she came. Before returning to Kyosuke's apartment, she stopped by her room. Haru frantically grabbed her violin case, then dashed back into the night. That might have been Naito, the head of the Shin'ei group. When she gets back, I ask Usami about the situation outside.
マジっすか? こんな顔だったんですが。
She grabs the notepad I keep on the telephone stand and sketches a quick portrait. Yeah, probably him. Naito was likely pleased to hear that Gonzo had died. He didn't appear at the SOA meetings today or yesterday. Supposedly, he's been ill.
もう一人の外人さんはこんな感じでした。
She drew up another picture with amazing speed. I've got nothing on that one.
何か容器を感じませんか?
Well, it is fishy. We can check it out together tomorrow. We'll take my car. That way, on the off chance that something similar happens, we'll be able to follow them. Usami nodded and turned on the television.
ゴンゾーさんが亡くなられた件について、警察はどう動いているんですかね。
The news reported it as your everyday Yakuza warfare. Behind the scenes, the police have been investigating a criminal known as Maou for a while now. That's what Gonzo said, anyway.
私たちも警察に知っていることを話した方が良さそうですね。
Nah, news has already spread that Maou is my brother. Samijima Kyohei. I'm sure that the police have found that out by now. Detectives will probably come looking for me soon to ask some questions.
魔王はこれまで異常なまでに警察の介入を恐れていましたね。
Yeah. Funny how things change. I heave a sigh and stare at Usami. There's something I still want to ask you.
私がなぜ魔王を追っているかですね。
Yeah, I figure I have a right to know now. I had an idea, though.
浅井さんほどのマニアであれば、私の母がどうして亡くなったかはご存知ですね。
Yeah, it was at a theater in Moscow, wasn't it? Terrorists bombed the building, or the place during a performance.
テロの目的はコンサートに招かれていた中東の国の大使だったそうですが、母も巻き添えになりました。
Was that your first encounter with Mao?
ええ。お前は宇佐美の娘かと聞かれました。まあ、話すと長くなりますんで。
I'll ask some other time. By the way, what's that? I pointed to a violin case laying against the back of the sofa.
なんすかね。
Did you change your mind about playing for me?
どうすかね。
What do you mean, maybe? She reminded me of the old Usami a bit. I lay down on the sofa and jerked my chin at her. I'd like to interview you, Mishima-san.
何ニタニタしてんすか。
I hear you were born in Germany, is that right?
まあ。
Yeah, so, when someone says Germany, the first thing that comes to mind is automobiles, am I right?
浅井さんのドイツはそんなですか。って、なんで自分がツッコミに回らなくてはならないんですか。
Feels weird, right? It's usually the other way around. If you don't like it, you could always just give me a straight answer.
わかりましたよ。
Did you like chocolate as a kid?
え?
I mean, Japan has a good variety of chocolate, but Europe is its very birthplace.
まあ、店の前でジタバタしてた記憶はありますね。買ってくれないと動かないみたい
な。Sounds like a normal little girl. Did you watch flamenco performances often?
それスペインっすけどね。まあ、旅行で一度見に行きましたね。舞台上で女の人が真っ赤なドレス着て踊ってるんですよ。自分2歳くらいだったと思うんですが、今でもなんとなく覚えてます。
Did you like to go out and dance as a child?
いえ、全然。自分は子供の頃から凄まじいインドアっぷりでしたから。
So, did you play house then?
やってましたね。人形とか買ってもらってました。向こうの人形はやたらリアルでしてね、顔立ちとかちょっと怖いんすよ。
Did your dad ever send you a doll from Japan? Like that one doll, you know, the one that was all the rage. Kari-chan or something? My skills as an interviewer are somewhat lacking.
ああ、ありましたね。でも、あれはドイツの友達に貸したっきりですね。
They never gave it back?
いや、なんて言うんですかね。そういう感じなんですよ、向こうは。貸してあげるって言っても、一度持ったら自分のもの、みたいなところがあって。
Yeah, I've heard that. Foreigners just take pens or paper without any bad intentions.
ちなみに、自分がちょっとずうずうしいのもそこから来ています。
Darn foreigners! Bull.
でもまあ、日本に戻ってきた時は、正直きつかったですね。
The difference in customs did, you mean?
まず給食っすかね。なんでみんなと同じもん食うんだよ、とか思ってましたね。
Oh? And that wasn't because you weren't used to Japanese food?
いや、ドイツでも和食だったんすけどね。なんでしょう。こっちって余ったもの分け合ったりするじゃないですか。気使うじゃないですか。
Isn't that a good thing?
そうなんでしょうけど、余ったプリンとか自分が全部いただいたことがあるんですよ。
Well, it happens to everyone at one time or another. The weird looks, I mean.
向こうは自分は自分みたいな感じでしてね。すごいのになると昼食にキャベツとか持ってくる子とかいまして。でも全然浮いてないです。キャベツで OK なんです。
That sounds like BS, but we can roll with it. What kind of place did you live in?
ケルンにいた時は大自然に囲まれてましたね。近くに牧場がありました。といっても田舎という感じでもなく、とにかく広かったです。
I also hear you lived in Tomenbetsu City once. Is that correct?
そうですけど、今と昔じゃ大違いですよ。10年前はセントラル街なんてなかったじゃないですか。
Ah, so that's why you were a little lost when you first arrived last year. Central Boulevard practically popped up overnight to us residents, too. It went up quite quickly. Is it true that city development is something the Europeans tend to take slowly?
人も時間ものんびりです。日本みたいに小さな個人商店が大きなスーパーに変わってるようなこともないです。
They have higher ceilings over there, too. Your violin must have echoed quite a bit.
ですね。日本で暮らしてた時はとにかく音がブワーッとこもる感じで、慣れるまで時間がかかりましたね。
We finally got to talking about the violin. Did you start playing the violin because of your mother's influence?
でしょうかね。母のコンサートとか見て綺麗だなって思ってました。
But of all things, the violin?
ええ、楽器は高価だし目指す人も多いし、私がやってみるって言った時、母も複雑な顔してましたね。
Kids don't usually think about consequences down the line.
最初は弾けたら楽しいっていうだけでやってましたよ。音楽教室に通ってたんですが、先生の前で弾くといつも手を叩いて喜んでくれるんです。
Usami looked happy as she reminisced on days gone by.
母も仕事が忙しく、よく家を空けていたんですがね。帰ってくるたびに褒めてくれました。またちょっと上手くなったねって。自分はそれが嬉しくて、今度はもっと褒めてもらおうとかワクワクしながら練習してました。
I see.
だもんで学校が終わったら夜中までこもって弾いてましたね。寝るか食うかバイオリンか、そんな毎日が半年くらい続きました。
Oh? How were the recitals?
グループで同じ曲を弾くんすけどね、自分だけなぜかちょっと目立ってたらしいですね。終わった後、あなたはバイオリンが大好きでしょうとか言われました。
It sure sounds like she does, at least.
それからはもっといろんな人の前で弾いてみたいとか思うようになりまして。
Her smile was no less than cherubic.
それで母も本格的に自分に教えてくれるようになりましてね。
I never knew this Usami. This innocent girl who spoke with a sparkle in her eyes.
本気を出した母は厳しかったですよ。何をやっても無駄無駄無駄でした。いかに自分が感覚だけでやってたか分かったのは、日本であるコンクールに出た時なんです。
Oh?
とにかくやたら怖いんです。静かですし真っ暗ですし、審査員の方はクールですし。
Are contests in the West more friendly?
発表会に近い温かさがありましたね。だもんで結果はひどかったですよ。
Yeah, well, contests in Japan are probably concerned with intonation, rhythmic accuracy, and other technicalities more than overall interpretation.
一応海外なら評価されるでしょうという一言をいただきましたが、とにかく思い知らされました。だからバイオリンの持ち方、構え方から見直して猛練習したんです。
Did you ever go off to a music camp?
行きました行きました。今海外で活躍しているようなことも一緒になりましたね。こんなすごいこと一緒になっていいのかなとかビクビクしてました。
I can't even imagine Usami being nervous. Did you get stiff shoulders?
いえ、むしろ痛いのは背中ですね。あとは写真とか撮るといつも左肩が上がってるとか言われましたね。筋肉が変についちゃって。
She shut her mouth as if remembering her normal personality.
まあ今はそんな悩みもありませんが。
She forced a self-depreciating smile, but it couldn't hide her sadness. It wasn't fun to look at. You wanted to be a soloist, right?
ええ、オーケストラは気使いますね。自分のせいでアンサンブルを乱したらとか思うと無理でした。
She must have been pretty timid as a kid. But you don't have to worry about that in front of me.
え？
I speak to her gently, and Usami's face returns to that of a young girl again. You want to play in front of a lot of people, right? Then let me hear you. This place is soundproof fairly well, and it had better be, for how expensive it is. Even if you screw up, only I can hear it. Usami's shoulders shook a little. She took a deep breath, then stared at her violin case. Haru. When I call her, she looks up at me.
わかりました。京介くんになら。
She scurries to grab the case as she blushes. She opens the case gently, as one would open a jewelry box. Inside the solid case was a cloth sack. I could tell just from how much care she put into her instrument. Then, from out of the sack, she pulled a beautiful, aging, glossy violin. Damn, that looks pretty expensive.
実に浅井さんらしい意見ですが、お金には変えられません。
It must be the violin her mother used.
ちょっとお待ちを。
She rummaged through a bag that she brought along with the case.
チューナーとか持ってないですよね。
Nah. Excuse me. Nah, I'm just a fan after all. I don't play.
参りました。
Hey now, you're not going to leave me blue-balled, are you? Though since violins are made of wood, the change in temperature or humidity between her place and mine might have thrown the strings out of tune.
いいんですか?
Yeah, go for it. If it were the rainy season, though, I might be singing a different tune. When the air is exceptionally humid, the strings stretch easily, sending the pitch and timbre straight to hell.
一応毎日チューニングはしてるんですが。
Clearly, I don't know much about music. Oh, so you still practice daily?
いえいえ、手入れをしているだけで演奏はしていません。
So she's just attached to it.
不本意ですが、わかりました。
She takes a black bar off of what looks like soap into her hand. Is that pine resin?
よくご存知で。
It's commonly called rosin, but she's going to apply it to the horsehair bow. She lightly presses her bow to the bar and glides along it, top to bottom.
意外と覚えているもんですね。
Remember what?
あ、いえ。つけすぎるのも良くないし、かといって足りないと音が弱くなってしまうんです。
So her body still remembers how much to apply.
あ、浅井さん、食器洗い用のスポンジか何かもらえませんか?長らく弾いてないもので片当てがなくて。
Ah.
使わない方も多いですが、自分は服の下に入れると結構安定するんで。
But will a dish sponge really do?
ええ、自分はよくそれで練習してましたから。
Alright. Do you have a chin rest?
ついてます。と言っても、化粧をしているわけではないので、そこまで気にしなくても。
What the heck? What if you sweat on the violin?
そんな激しい曲を弾かせるつもりですか?
Well, start off with some Bach, I guess.
やはりですか。まあ、バッハは私も好きです。
Hey now, who do you think you're talking to saying that you like Bach? What do you know about Bach?
バッハの数学的な才能に惹かれました。
Oh, so you do know your stuff. He wrote a song that's the same whether you played forwards or backwards.
ええ、まるで怪文みたいに。本当に神秘的な人です。
Alright then, I've got it. Play Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring.
いけって楽譜もないのに。
You can't just play it from memory? Was the rumor about Mishima Haruna being able to play any song after hearing it once just a rumor after all?
どこからそんなデマが。まあ、なんとなくでよければ聞いてみせましょう。
I'll let you play as half-assed as you want today.
今日のところはって 今後もあるんですか？
Of course. You're my woman, aren't you? Embarrassed, Usami starts preparing to play. Oh man, I'm turning off the lights.
またそうやってハードルを上げる。
Darkness permeated my room. Ah, wait. I changed my mind. Play Air on the G string.
浅井さんが一番好きな曲ですか。わがままさんですね。
Grumbling, Usami takes the bow and puts the violin to her left shoulder. Usami's slender body stands in the moonlight. With hair down to her legs, she shuts her eyes as if going to sleep. She was different from the usual Usami. There was something mysterious about her. Do you need to warm up?
結構です。
She answered bluntly. She lightly grips the bow with her right hand and brings her left hand to the violin's neck. I noticed the calluses on Usami's fingertips when we made love. Her touch was rough and gritty. She must have practiced intensely all her life. Those same fingertips now slowly descend to the fingerboard and lightly press the strings. I take a deep breath in anticipation and wait for her first note with sweaty palms. I'm confident, no, sure, that the melody she plays will be stunningly beautiful. At this very moonlit moment, I'm completely enchanted by the girl known as Usami Haru. Her bow reaches for the G string, the string that plays the lowest sound.
すみません。
At first, it was nothing but a whisper.
いませんか。
Then her well-formed eyebrow twitched.
ほら、F ホールを這い上がって、G 線の上に。
Then a sound like fingernails on a blackboard resounded through the room.
悪魔がいませんか。
I couldn't believe my ears.
すみません。浅井さん。
She starts shaking.
私には無理です。
What? What did Usami just say? The devil?
ええ、邪魔をするんです。いつも。すみません、おかしなこと言って。
I've heard of performers with prodigal talent who put themselves in a trance-like state as they play. Sometimes it allows them to suppress physical and emotional pain during a performance. And sometimes, when they've achieved a state of complete ecstasy, they begin to see fairies or hear the devil's whispers.
やっぱり見ませんね。すみません、ドン引きさせてしまって。
It sounded like a joke coming from her, but Usami's body was shaking abnormally.
思い出すんです。
She took a few shallow breaths.
母の耳がバイオリンのG線にかかり、ひときわ力強い低音が響いたその瞬間。
Usami! The rumbling drowned out her mother's beautiful melody. The earth shook, and Haru's body was tossed into the air. The sound burst her sensitive eardrums as destruction rained down, raging across the theater. It was the blast of a bomb. The stage, the seating area, the balcony, the boxes, everything vomited smoke into the air. Screams littered the atmosphere. Unintelligible screams of pain and terror. Haru saw someone lying on the ground on the other side of the theater. She saw other things which had lost all semblance of humanity. She saw fragments, pieces of human beings. Chunks of flesh decorated puddles of blood right before her very eyes. Something that looked like a tree branch had landed near the ruins of a crumbled marble pillar. It was an arm, ripped out of its socket. A man sat on the ground near Haru, clinging to one of the chairs. He was holding his stomach, as if in desperate prayer. Something soft and of a dull color splashed out onto the ground. It was his intestines. There was blood everywhere. Everything was burnt and blackened. All that remained were the dead and dying. The smoke had frozen the girl so tightly that she wasn't even able to close her eyes. The world around her had completely changed. Her mother's skillful performance had at some point become an ensemble of low-pitched groaning. There were screams, and at the same time, a barrage of automatic weapons fire. The shots fired mercilessly in front of her. A few streams of blood surged out like snakes. Only after seeing that was she finally able to clench her teeth in fear. Death was near. Some time after she had finally escaped her inevitable death, a voice called out to her. Accepted, rather, not escaped. Accepted her inevitable death. Called out for her. Haru. Haru, it said, seeking the girl. She tried to squeeze out a reply, but couldn't. Her mother had been an expert at manipulating sound at will, yet the only response Haru was able to offer her, a response that would turn out to be her final words to her mother, was a raspy wheezing that hardly qualified as speech. A new voice called to her, this time a calm one from above her. He was dressed head to toe in black. The balaclava he wore covered his face, but his eyes laughed boldly at her. The man's figure, distorted from the hot air, seemed akin to one of the devils straight out of hell. What answer the girl gave the devil, she does not remember. But she must have given him a name. The devil returned a scornful smile. Some Middle Eastern language was being shouted about. The devil replied in the same tongue. The blood at his feet splashed.
Maou.
After that, something inside the girl broke. Like a violin missing a string, her heart stopped functioning normally. In exchange, she gained hatred. She gained hatred at the cost of her ability to play the violin. Usami's breathing was becoming rough, and her face was getting so pale that I was able to notice it from the moonlight alone. I know. Now calm down. Why is Usami, a passingly normal woman, chasing around the dangerous terrorist Maou? I finally understood the reason behind that reckless act. She was merely wandering through around grief-stricken, searching for salvation. I see. You did well to tell me. It's all right. Don't worry about it. It was my fault. I reach out to hold Usami. Don't worry about it. I'll do something about it. Her tone suddenly lost all emotion. Yeah, I'll catch Maou. That seemed the only way to save Usami. Her eyes went wide. Despite all the experiences we shared, we were still different people. I didn't understand a single ounce of Usami's despair. That night, I learned of the demon in Usami Haru's heart. The chains which we inherited from our parents have become our very own karma, binding us to an eternal winter. You'll be able to play again someday. No, I'll make her able to play. I'll do it with my own hands, not through unheard prayers to a useless god as I used to. As one single human, as one single man, I'll protect Haru. We had sex many times that night. We sought each other like animals, and I released my seed inside Haru. It was violent sex. Sex aimed at capturing each other's soul. The night wore on, and as exhaustion took us, we fell asleep in each other's arms. Pretty dark, right? The day has come to execute my final plan. I can't help but look back at the 10 years I've spent in preparation for this. Inspired by my father, Samijima Toshikatsu, an employee of a trading company, I aspired to study overseas. 10 years ago, I was just a kid. I had no money or power to speak of. I attended the Imperial College of London, hoping to gain the qualifications necessary to work at my father's company. My younger brother Kyosuke was still young and unreliable. When I returned to Japan every now and then, he'd make me play video games with him. His amiable personality and overall sociability was just like father. I remember him following me around, taking pictures of me as I helped mother with errands or chores. Thanks to father working himself to the brink, our family was never poor. Regardless, I refused any money they tried to give me to help pay for various expenses as I studied in Britain. I knew that mother, with her weak disposition, could have fallen ill at any moment. I also knew that father wanted to bring another life into the family. However, I did need the money. Thus, some friends and I decided to found a small import-export business in London to help pay the bills. Calling it an import-export business makes it sound impressive, but it was just peddling cheap junk. We sold t-shirts, pencils, Buddhist statues, and other such Japanese rubbish to shops in London. Japanese saran wrap and toiletries sold well for some reason, and there was a significant amount of orders for underwear emblazoned with kanji logos. Father would often package such novelties and send them to Britain for us. "You'll be a great trader someday," he told me. He always supported me from the bottom of his heart. I met Alan one day as I walked into a pub, trying to hawk an air freshener that promised extra effectiveness against the smell of alcohol. He looked to be in his mid-40s. He wore a houndstooth-checked flat cap, a cheap fox fur windbreaker, and worn old slacks. Sipping a Guinness and lighting his pipe occasionally, he looked like your everyday working-class Brit. "All right, mate," he hollered as he waved me over with a smile. He bought something from me from right off the bat. He said he loved Japan and would be a good customer. As we talked more, we started calling each other by our first names, and by the time he offered me a drink of sake, he already knew my background, specialties, and interests. Being raised in a peaceful country like Japan, I was hopelessly vulnerable. A young Japanese man was like clay in the hands of a veteran recruiter like Alan. By the time he first said the word mercenary, I was drunk. I'm a mercenary. My drunk self was more curious than cautious about that unfamiliar word. Supporting the business of war at its core was the lowest level of these so-called merchants of death, mercenary recruiters. Any system with the possibility of cooperation will eventually spawn a profit-based equivalent. And with the monstrous amount of money involved in war, there will always be monsters out there looking for a cut. And in any case, Alan himself was not working for some Arab big shot, super tongue-tied, or some capitalist corporate giant, but a monster that happened to deal in smaller figures. He had the proper qualifications and was a formal member of a recruitment agency. However, mercenary recruiters are not permitted to act out in the open. The law exists for diplomatic reasons, as a conformity for international law, and the connections to underground organizations cemented as an important rule to follow. Alan's talk captured the attention of his green listener. He tried to street-talk me into joining up as we drank Kurosawa and Yamato Damashi, and like a missionary for an evil cult, he waited patiently until his prey was no longer able to think. Still, I never said yes. As if to say that he already knew that, he laughed and replied, "But murder can sometimes save things that justice can't." I found that difficult to understand. It does stir a man's sense of adventure, but there's no reason to become something as mysterious as a mercenary. My gosh, I can't talk anymore. Warfare. I can't do it. Warfare. It's just warfare. Warfare may be an unfortunate constant in this world of ours, but it had nothing to do with me. If you ever find yourself in need of power, call me any time, Alan told me. After that day, a long time passed. My little sister was born and died. My father's silhouette, broken-hearted before little Kiyomi's portrait, is still burnt into my eyes. And soon after that, the same father was arrested under suspicion of murder. When I received the news from Mother, I abandoned my studying for the upcoming Arabic midterm and returned to Japan. Tomenbetsu City's holding cells. I was turned away 3 times under the excuse that they were still investigating the case, but I was eventually allowed to visit Father. Father nodded from behind the acrylic plate. Drink. Above his droopy cheeks, his worn-out eyes told of his lack of sleep. Father vaguely shook his head. Not once in the letter did he whine, but he'd fainted a few times. The fainting spells were bouts of heart disease. He'd suffered from it after the night he cried in front of Kiyomi's portrait as well. Or the night he cried. Father had killed Usami Yoshinori, his subordinate Kato, and 2 of Usami's other mahjong friends who were present. Is he going to be given the death penalty? There are plenty of reasons to be sympathetic towards him. Nevertheless, his crime was premeditated, and it couldn't be helped if they saw his method of killing as brutal. He was just possessed by his urge to kill at least Usami. The rest of them were just small-timers, writing off Usami's power. They could do nothing but mock Father. Then again, I personally think it's those kinds of vermin who deserve to die. When I spoke with a lawyer friend of Father's, he was unable to confidently determine whether Father had a chance at life. The decision wouldn't be made in 3 or 4 years. For 3 or 4 years, after all. I was incredibly worried. What truly disturbed me was that the world sympathized with Usami. As Father's letter detailed, Usami was a fraud and a chronic gambler. None of this was reported in any newspapers or television programs. Apparently, Usami had connections to politicians. Perhaps his famous wife, Mishima Haruna, had something to do with that. Would these things affect Father's sentencing, I wondered. But each time I attended their meetings and study sessions, I lost more hope. What I wanted to save wasn't this country's future, but my father, a man who might be sentenced to death. Kyohei. Father gently called my name. Thanks, Kyohei. Father's tears lent a curtain of air of fulfillment to his eyes. I mustered my courage and replied, Father bit his lip. I'm sorry. That sentence was certainly not aimed at Usami or the other 3, but at our family. I imagined the scene of the inevitable trial. the prosecution shouting things like, "The defendant shows no signs of regret." Indeed, father would never submit to Usami's memory, nor should he have to. Kyohei, can a genius like you answer a question for your old man? He looked to be begging Buddha for salvation. Am I the demon everyone says I am? Indeed, he is a demon, my reason and morality whispered coldly in my chest. He loved his family more than anything else. The smiles he brought to us were countless. I felt something burning inside me, and cursed my ingrate reason and morality. He'll always be, to me at least. That sentence, that determination sealed my life's fate.
お父さん、俺はイギリスに帰ります。しかし、必ず戻ってきます。何年先になるかわかりませんが、希望を捨てないでください。
There was no way that I was going to sit back and suck my thumb as the judicial system pondered his fate. I returned to Tomanbetsu City, packed my bags, and said goodbye to Kyosuke and mother. They were both worried at my departure. But wallowing in our sorrows wouldn't save father. I entrusted mother to Kyosuke and returned to Britain. My only miscalculation pertained to the beast named Azai Gonzo. The Yakuza debt collectors wouldn't relent on father's debt merely because he was in jail. Mother, left behind on her own, fell into Gonzo's clutches, but I was left in the dark about this until far later. Alan greeted me with a huge grin at the aforementioned pub. I thought I'd see you again. I asked my one question bluntly. If I follow you, will I gain enough power to free a prisoner from jail? Alan's gaze when he looked at me then changed for the very first time. I just procure mercenaries. I had no idea you wanted to be a terrorist. I didn't care what he called it. Terrorist, mercenary, soldier. I didn't care. All I wanted was to find a way to save my father. Well, work with us for now. Lots of our people declare themselves free agents after 2 or 3 years. It wasn't like I didn't have any hesitation towards going with Alan. It would mean having to go years without any contact with my mother in Japan. It was only when I got involved in the London underground bombings that my resolve strengthened. Terrorists, angered by one of Britain's national issues, blew up a subway platform with a suitcase bomb. There were around 500 casualties, and one of them was me as I walked down the entrance's stairwell. My only injury was a bruised waist, but I was swept into the waves of panicking commuters and lost my bag, my wallet, and my passport. I jumped out of my seat as I watched the news the next day. On the list of deceased was written Samijima Kyohei, Japanese. The London police force's half-assed investigations were so infamous that I'd even heard stories in Japan, so it wasn't all that surprising. For example, a month after I enrolled in college, a friend of mine was arrested. He was charged with sexual assault. Because he had an alibi, he was eating with me at the time. He was quickly released. Apparently, the police barged in arresting him merely because his girlfriend accused him. There was also a strange case involving another university, where an assistant professor was surrounded during a lecture by police toting submachine guns. This too was because of a single testimony, this time by a Pakistani immigrant, because the professor looked similar to a terrorist. In Japan, where people are only arrested after concrete proof of a crime is discovered, these false accusations rarely happen. But in Britain, these false accusations run rampant. The media takes a big to-do about the case nearly every time, ensuring that even after the charges are dropped, the damage has already been done. I can understand that Britain has been under terrorist threat for a long time, but it's gotten to the point where it's unsafe to walk around at night. People have been shot in the streets without any attempt at an arrest. Thus, I wouldn't be surprised if the man in immigration control assigned to the case was simply too busy shooting heroin to make a call confirming my death. When I was about to tell the embassy that I'd merely dropped my passport, Alan stopped me. If you stay dead, it'll shave 5 years off of fulfilling your dream. It was later, when I started working as a mercenary specializing in intelligence gathering, that I'd fully realized the advantage of playing dead. Alongside the recruiters, there were also people who sold falsified records. For example, in Britain, there were Indo-Pakistani immigrants who were subcontracted by certain big shots in the mafia. They have a lot of big connections around the world. So long as your request isn't too unreasonable, they'll help you cover up your past. They sold passports, driver's licenses, and ID cards from various public organizations that allowed access to bank accounts, credit cards, or traveler's checks. You could pretty much get anything you needed, as long as you had the money for it, of course. But regardless of how sloppy these countries' identity checks were in the face of modernized society, having a dead person pose as a dead person will always be far more reliable and economical than having a living person do so. After all, when you're officially dead, you don't have to worry about being the subject of any ongoing investigations. It also makes it impossible for someone to get an accurate profile of you. Kyohei, you're a man of outstanding talent. Alan wasn't like the average recruiter swaggering around Tomenbetsu City's Central Boulevard like they owned the place. The only people he had his eyes on were people who seemed promising, even if inexperienced. I had no intent to answer his expectations. I just signed the provisional contract to fulfill my own goal. The next day, I paid my lodging costs and headed to a rural street on the outskirts of London. Woo! My god, man! So much narration. I gotta take a drink. Sorry about that, I'm majorly stuffed up. I think it's because of the weather, so it's kind of, woo! So much talking. Alright. At first glance, it was just a regular farm. No, it was a regular farm. It was a regular farm. There were cows, goats, and sheep, and people milking them without a care in the world. They said the training camp was just the farmer's side job, but it was obviously being financed by some conglomerate or syndicate. In other words, he must have been a high-ranking warlord that no doubt has more than a few mercenaries under contract. Needless to say, he was quite wealthy. And a common aspect for the wealthy in any country would be their prosperity for cutting costs. Our lodgings were coarse, our meals mostly scant, and vegetarian in nature. I, along with the other fools that fell prey to the temptations of the devil, were assigned to a group of 5 or 6 people. We all underwent medical and fitness evaluations. During the initial stages, there was a heavy emphasis on exposing any special skills or experience that might be of some use. More often than not, this took the form of an intense interrogation. It felt like we were a part of some twisted livestock competition. However, since these procedures were only a formality, people like fugitives, deviants, and the like were not filtered out of the selection. Britain is a country of varied races, so naturally the people gathered were also quite varied. I was forced into a sweatshop alongside an extremely pale man, and after 3 days there, I caught a glimpse of a veritable giant sobbing. After having my aptitudes harshly evaluated, I was called into another room. There, I was beckoned over by a stern-looking Caucasian dressed in a military uniform. Apparently the fact that I had told them I was a black belt in karate had caught their attention. The man was less intimidating than he looked. I'd gotten into a fight on the streets of London once before, but the Westerners in general have a tendency to try to subdue you with physical strength. As long as you take the proper distance and avoid their unrefined charges and kicks, one swift counter to the vitals is all it takes. But putting my skills on display like that was an act of suicide in a way, as it only resulted in upping the level of the training I received. Once you reach the 5th level, they send you off to the battlefield. This facility, given the nickname the Pin, is one of many scattered through Europe. It was indeed common for these war ranches to camouflage themselves as everyday crop or dairy farms, but in some countries, they operated right out in the open. After the cattle parade was over, and I signed a contract with a mercenary contractor, I was sent to military school in Switzerland for a military school in Switzerland that was famous for churning out soldiers of fortune. My instructor there was a man that went by the Devil. He was a short, slender man, and he was such a gentleman that if it weren't for the military uniform, you might mistake him to be the manager of a fine tailoring business or the like. For someone who went by the Devil, he was fairly mild-mannered. He was nothing like the cruel drill sergeants that you might see in a movie. I'd heard that he was an ex-member of the British Special Forces. Of course, there was a sort of unwritten rule that one mustn't talk about one's past, so to this day, I don't know for sure whether that was true or just a rumor. What I do know is that the Devil certainly could display some incredibly advanced techniques. Between lights out at 9 p.m. and raising at 4 a.m., the Devil would occasionally launch a guerrilla attack on us as we slept. The curriculum was divided into field and study. In the field segments, we covered topics such as the usage of munitions, marksmanship, the proper methods of arming and dismantling bombs, sabotage, close quarters combat, and reconnaissance. The study segments covered subjects such as communications, navigation, survival, and the like. Due to the harsh training, there were some among us who dropped out. Some even became handicapped after an accident during training. The only reason things went smoother for me was because, besides my native Japanese, I was fluent in English, Arabic, German, French, and Spanish. You like playing around, don't you? What a child. One day, after a training session in close quarters combat, the Devil came over to offer me words in a rare, harsh tone. It's true. I did have a habit of taking my time and finishing off my opponent after getting them to the ground. I held off because I wanted to see how they would react when thrown into a predicament. You had a bit of a smile on your face, you know that? I actually never noticed it myself, but regardless, it was a rhetorical question. Try paying a little respect to your enemy. I'm not training psychotic murderers here. The British gentry have a prerequisite virtues before one can call himself a gentleman. On one hand, he was teaching us how to kill people. On the other, he was preaching morals. I was probably on edge with murderous excitement at the time. After all, I was being taught how to kill people day in and day out. During meals and breaks, everyone always looked down in silence. We didn't want to see each other's faces. If we did, we'd probably want to kill each other. Asking us to respect our enemy as we were being eyed by gun-toting guards was simply preposterous. I couldn't help but grab my stomach and laugh. Then how do you explain the brutal acts performed by some of the British soldiers in the last war in the Middle East? Hypocrites honestly believe that the good deeds of the few can really save the world over time. If you want to put up the smoke and mirrors on someone like that, just draw up an analogy on a grander scale. Mention human nature, talk about a whole nation, discuss the inherent implications of society, currency, or property. Simply start a conversation with something akin to, didactic? I don't even know. Didactic novelist's opening, and you're guaranteed a hit or two. I was fully prepared to be struck for what I said, but that was the first time I felt respect for the Devil. That's exactly right, child. Where are we right now? A dump, I answered. That's right, a dump. Right now, unprecedented terrorism threatens Japan. People continue to die every second in Africa, but that has nothing to do with us, for we do not live in the world. We live in the individual. And then the lips of the Devil, who had just earlier removed his gentlemanly mask, twisted into a smile befitting his name. This facility is one of the most preeminent military academies in all of Europe. Our alumni are, as a whole, either emotionally numb or have their own personal dark beliefs, which they cannot or will not shoulder onto anyone else. I expect great things from you, he said as he tapped me on the shoulder. I understood then. Let us assume that right and wrong, good and evil, are subjective concepts. Thus, without any objectivity to guide you, without any semblance of reality or fact, one can only truly be a king of evil when living in one's own personal reality until the bitter end. Only in one's own mind can one truly be the devil, the Maou. And this could go on frickin' forever, so I'm going to cut the video here because I figured this would be over like 10-15 minutes ago. So, as always, thank you guys very much for watching. We will pick up here in the next episode. I'll see you then.